Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. It's so great to see all the interest in today's transit talk on free transit. My name is Hester Serebrin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the policy director of TCC. If you don't know us already, Transportation Choices is a policy and advocacy organization in Washington State, working to bring people more and better transportation options that are healthy, sustainable, and accessible. Today's transit talk is supported by our sponsor, Amazon. TCC would like to take a moment and acknowledge that while we are gathering virtually today, our panel is joining us from unceded lands across what is commonly known as Washington State. Our panelists are calling in from the tribal lands of the Coast Salish, Spokane, and Yakima people. We are dropping a resource in the chat. We invite you to learn about the land you are on, and we welcome you to acknowledge it in the chat. Mobility for all cannot be achieved without recognizing those that first navigated these lands. As we work towards building a more accessible world, let us honor the physical spaces we occupy and the Native communities past, present, and future who live and thrive here. Before we get started, I just want to point out a few things about our virtual space. One, we have enabled the chat feature to make the webinar more interactive. Please use the chat to ask questions, expand on discussion topics, and of course, please be respectful of our panelists and each other. Questions can also be submitted directly to panelists through the chat. We will have staff sorting through all questions, and we will answer as many as we can, both during the main portion of the talk and at the Q&A at the end. The whole talk will be recorded and a link will be emailed to you once it is available to download. And finally, we have enabled closed captions for this talk. If you would like to show or hide the subtitles, you may do so using the options at the bottom of your Zoom screen under live transcript. All right, with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'm thrilled today to have 4 experts representing different perspectives in this important discussion. We've got Terry White, Katie Wilson, Councilmember Kate Burke, and Richard DeRock. And before we dive into questions, I'd like to invite them to say a bit more about themselves and the perspective they're bringing to today's discussion. We'll start with Terry, then Katie, then Richard, then Kate. Please introduce yourself, and as an icebreaker, please tell us your favorite transit route. Terry, go ahead.
Thanks, Hester. Good afternoon to you all. First off, really thank the organizers for getting us all together to have this really very important conversation. My name is Terry White. I am King County Metro's general manager. My favorite route, I want to say all of them because I have used all of them in my life growing up, but I'll focus on the 7, which is one of our mainstays that runs from south of the valley all the way up and through to the U District in its heyday. I grew up on transit, which is why I want to say all of them. My mom was disabled, couldn't drive a car, single parent mom. We grew up in a housing project, and the only way I got around was Metro Transit. So it was my experience, it was my life, loved it so much that as early as 10 years old, I knew this is where I wanted to be. I wanted to drive a bus, and I wanted to be a part of community and helping folks move from a place to a place. So fast forward to today, I've been at Metro 34 years. If you count some of the earlier years where operators used to let me help work their signage, I've been in transit literally my entire life. Again, I'm excited about what it does in terms of opportunity. And we really do believe that transit should be available for all. Since COVID, we're doing our best to build back better than even before, and we will continue to be guided by our values, safety, equity, and sustainability. Nice to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Terry. Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Wilson. I'm the General Secretary of the Transit Riders Union. We are a democratic membership organization of transit riders fighting for a better public transit system and for many other good things in the greater Seattle area. Happy to be here. The Transit Riders Union, we've been around for about 10 years, and free transit, affordable transit is really kind of in our DNA. We've been pushing to make progress on this front for a very long time. So happy to be part of the discussion. My favorite transit route, I guess to be realistic, I'm just going to have to say the light rail line because I live up on Capitol Hill, and that ends up being a great way for me to get around these days.
Thanks, Katie. Richard, go ahead.
So I'm Richard DeRock. I'm the general manager over at Link Transit in Wenatchee. I've been here now as general manager for 20 years. And before I was here, I was the executive director of Access Services, which is the elderly and disabled transportation system in Los Angeles County for 16 years. And actually been in the transit world for 41 years. I actually started while I was in college. I drove for the student run bus system at UC Davis and got going there. And on the topic of free transit, been dealing with this in a number of places over the years. We're currently fare free. We're in a 2-year pilot to see how that works. Actually, having been fare free previously, Link started off as a fare free system its first 10 years. And after I-695 imposed fares, and we're back to being fare free right now. Also dealt with fare-free systems in a number of places in California in my career, both in Los Angeles and in the Central Valley. And so well aware of some of the challenges and some of the other issues with them. So it's not as clean a question as people like to think, but it definitely has certain advantages and has its place. And I think that's one of the things we got to figure out. How does it work and how does it make sense in each community?
And your favorite transit route?
Oh, my favorite transit route. Well, I believe the route number is Route 16 in San Francisco. That's the route that goes up to Stockton. At least from the days I used to ride it, you'd have to get off about halfway up the hill. The driver would say, everyone off, and start pushing. Because the bus, it was so steep, the bus couldn't make it up by itself. And actually part of the route was you'd get off and push, help the bus make over the steep part of the route. And that, that was back in the early 70s. They still haven't electrified that route because it's just too steep to run, but that was sort of a unique introduction to public transportation.
That's awesome. Councilmember Burke.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. My name is Kate Burke. I'm on the city council here in Spokane, and my work around zero fare transit has been mainly trying to implement ideas, being on the Spokane Transit Authority board here locally, and then also the Spokane Regional Transit Council here in Spokane. So I've just been trying to work, what I've been doing is trying to chip away at some of the infrastructure that has kept our fares in play. And so every little bit helps. So I've created, I saw Delana on the call, and she works with STA, and hi, there she is in the chat. So I helped to propose an idea that we would do half off bus passes for nonprofit organizations in the community. It's been a widely popular program. And so that was one of my attempts to try to get us to be more used to looking at fares in a different way. So, and then, I mean, my favorite transit ride, I'm really lucky where I live. I live by 3 to 4 different bus routes. But my favorite one is the 28 or the 26. Because it takes me right downtown to my favorite coffee shop, Boots Bakery, and that's where I have all of my meetings. And so I take that one pretty much every day when I'm heading downtown. So yeah, thank you for having me. Excited for the conversation.
Thank you all so much. All right, we're going to dive into our first question. Free transit has become a hot topic in cities and towns across the country. We've seen several agencies, including some here in Washington, go fare free during COVID, and others have adopted ongoing pilot programs. Many others have engaged in conversations with elected officials, advocates, and the general public on this topic. To start our conversation today, please share what might motivate your agency, or what did motivate your agency or constituency to go fare free, and what do you think are the biggest opportunities in doing so? We know equity plays a big part, so please touch on that. But also please add any other considerations or relevant policy goals or problems we might be trying to solve when we talk about fare free. And I'm actually going to start with Katie. I think you've got about 2 to 3 minutes each.
Okay, yeah. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, free transit is kind of in the DNA of the Transit Riders Union. We started out, TRU grew out of the fight to save bus service back in 2011 when Metro was looking at big cuts due to the recession. And, at that time, fares had been raised several times in really quick succession as Metro was trying to raise revenue. And so, a lot of riders, especially at that time when unemployment was high, were really feeling the pinch of rising fares. And our first big campaign was protesting the end of the ride free area, which you might remember used to exist in downtown Seattle. So I think, right from the beginning, our members have included a lot of transit riders, low-income transit riders for whom the rising cost of bus fares was a challenge. And so for us, it's coming from, a point of view of wanting to make, mobility a human right, and no one should not be able to get where they need to go because they can't afford it. I think that the bigger picture is kind of, we want to flip how we think about public transit, how it's funded and who benefits from it. I don't like the way that transit agencies refer to riders as customers, right? I don't think that mobility should be a product that you have to purchase, right? And so we kind of want to start to reframe transit ridership as a public good, not just kind of your personal choice of how you get around, but recognizing that when people make the choice to use public transit or when they need to use public transit, that's benefiting everyone. And so we should be making it as easy as possible, and if possible free, to do that. And I think that, in the context of a worsening climate crisis, this is, increasingly easy argument to make, right? That public transit is a public good and that we should be incentivizing people to choose that.
Thank you, Katie. I once heard an advocacy group describe their vision for transit as that of public libraries, where they were free and easy for everyone to use and provided resources of all sorts. So I really thought of that when you mentioned that.
I'll just jump in one more time and say that one of our longtime founding members, Pauline, who, if you're a Seattle Times reader, you might have seen her profiled as the transit fairy, who's basically going around and cleaning up bus stops as a volunteer, has been doing this forever. She likes to talk about how public transit should be like a public utility, like your water or your electricity that goes everywhere and that everyone can count on.
Awesome. Let's go to Councilmember Burke now.
Awesome, thank you. So I think what kind of started me on this path of looking into zero fare transit here in the Spokane region is that I serve one of the lowest income populations for sure in our city, but also in the state of Washington. And so when you see, like Katie was saying, it's not really a luxury for a lot of the folks in my community. It's a necessity. It's how people get around. It's just like turning on your water and getting clean water out of your faucet. They have to get to work. They have to get to appointments and stuff like that. So by making our system more efficient and effective, it can only better people who are struggling in my district. So, but what we're seeing is, I think in about 2015, we passed a tax increase in the TBA, and we didn't raise it to the amount that we could. We raised it less than we could have, which I think was a failure because it passed by a large amount of tax or of voters. And so in that promise of the tax increase was that we would get 12% of our fare box recovery, or 12% of our budget would be from fare box recovery, and or 20%, but we're only at 12%. And so what some of the people on STA board are saying right now is that we need to raise the prices to get on the bus again so that we can make it to 20% with our fare box recovery. And that's just an ungodly amount, especially for my constituents. And so I started looking into ways to kind of service the community in a different way. And what I started looking into, actually Kansas City went fare free, and I basically reached out to their CEO and chatted with him to go over all of the ins and outs of what he did, and gathered a lot of really good ideas and started trying to chip away at what we could do here in Spokane. And so that's kind of what started it. And then when you start looking at the numbers, a city like Spokane is in a perfect spot to be able to do something like this, because like I said, 12% fare box recovery is actually not that much of our budget because we're such a smaller city than say Seattle. And so by figuring out how to make up the rest of that revenue is not going to be super difficult. It's just going to take a lot of imagination and creativity. And that's something that I've been working on. So anyway, I think overall, looking into kind of the other communities who have been doing this and the pluses that we see beyond just equity, just all together, I like to say that like a healthy community is when anybody can ride the bus or any transit system. And that's driven from equity, but also just the fact that, we have a system and a service that is efficient and can take people where they need to go. So we don't have to have cars. So it's an environmental impact, things like that. So yeah, that's kind of what, how I kind of got into this. And I've been championing a lot of different ideas around zero fare, or at least trying to, again, chip away at the infrastructure that has us thinking in this one track mind that the only way to have this revenue come in is by charging people to ride the service. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Richard, let's hear from you.
Well, for us, going fare free right now was a byproduct of COVID. We suspended fares due to the COVID situation, in trying to keep our passengers away from our operators and the fare boxes. And that wasn't a huge lift for us to do because we had 3 fare-free routes in our downtown corridor and have had for 7 years. And those routes had actually grown to be about 40% of our total ridership was riding on those 3 routes over a significant period of time. So shifting the entire system to be fare-free wasn't a huge lift, if you will. It was accelerating some discussions we've been having prior to the COVID situation on fares. And we've been meeting with our board and our community talking about what our choices were. And a big issue for us is the cost of fare collection. Our system is, I call us the bipolar system. We are a small urban area in town, but we're also an incredibly rural area. So we're the largest rural system in the state. We're the smallest urban system in the state. And they're very different. And so we have a 2 zones fare system. If you ride ours on our long distance routes, say to Manson, which is 75 miles one direction from Wenatchee to Manson, that's a $2.50 fare. In town, our routes up to about 11 miles were $1 fare. And in the short downtown circulator routes, which are about 3.5 to 4 miles in length, those are fare free. Trying to get an electronic fare payment system, which is what particularly the younger population does not carry change, does not use paper money. They want to do electronic fare payment that can deal with multiple fare types and distance-based fares is incredibly expensive. We couldn't find anything that was going to cost us less than $7 or $8 million, and we only collect $700,000 to $800,000 a year in fare revenue. And I kept saying to the board, you can't justify the cost of collection for the amount of money we're getting off of this. It doesn't make sense to do this, and we're quickly losing ridership because we're disengaging a significant chunk of our population who doesn't have the wherewithal to pay the fares because they don't use cash the way they used to do it, let alone the cost of counting and calculating the money on the backside. So when the COVID situation cleaned up enough that we could go back to collecting fares, we recommended not doing it. We said, we're in a financial situation that we can afford to give up on that $700,000. Currently, we had just passed a sales tax. We were in the midst of an expansion of service. We think we should see how this works out going forward on a fare-free system. And partially on the equity issues, we had seen that our 2-zone fare system, while it's trying to deal with the equity of distance, it had real significant issues, particularly in our Hispanic and immigrant populations that don't have good language skills, where we were finding individuals were paying dramatically higher fares than we intended because it was confusing. We found one woman who was working as a house cleaner, who was starting her day up in Leavenworth, paying a $2.50 fare to come into Wenatchee, transferring to a bus to ride to Chelan, paying a second $2.50 fare, and doing it both directions. So she was paying $10 a day to commute between the two cities. She could have done a day pass for $3, but she didn't understand the fare system to do it, and had done that for almost 2 years before the operators finally recognized that was an issue. And that's becomes part of the issue of how do you communicate. Fare is really one of the more complicated things we have to deal with. Federal regulations and various rules force you to be complicated even in a simple system. And so it makes it really, really difficult to communicate. And it's one of the really significant impediments to first-time riders getting on the bus. It's because you never know what it actually is going to look like and how to pay and so forth. And taking that away was part of the strategy of trying to rebuild ridership after the COVID hit and tried to make the system work going forward. So that was all part of the arguments of moving it forward.
Thank you, Richard. A great reminder that we need to provide instructions in all languages. Terry, go ahead.
Thanks. I won't take the time. I know we're gonna be crunched for time here, so I'm gonna quickly double down on what Katie said. We absolutely do believe that mobility is a human right, and it is absolutely important that fare is not a barrier to using transit. So we're very proud of Metro the work that we've done to prioritize accessibility across our entire network and to provide some subsidized transit passes to our customers with lower incomes, customers with disabilities, our seniors, and our youth. Our Orca Lift Card, which we launched in 2015, was the largest program of its kind anywhere in the country. And it continues to serve as a national model for expanding access to affordable mobility. Last year, late 2020, we initiated one of the most ambitious undertakings in the country by launching our fully subsidized transit passes for our riders with even greater fare challenges. That would qualify as zero fare. And I like the way Councilmember Burke put that. Metro is continuously examining how to increase access to transit. And it is these programs that we continue to heavily evaluate to inform how to best serve members of the community with financial need or other barriers.
Thank you, Terry. Not letting fare be a barrier is very succinct. So there was one audience question that I'm going to kind of mention, and then I'm going to steer us into our second question, and that was fare box recovery and fare box recovery ratio came up a bunch, and there are some questions on what the requirements are, whether those are federal requirements or local requirements. And so I would urge you, if this is relevant to you, to weave this into your answer for the following question, which is, I think everyone on this panel can agree that we want to provide the best experience to all riders, but we also know that funding public transit is challenging in the best of times. In each of your experiences, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges to fare-free transit? And are there any considerations that are unique to your region or agency? And this time we'll actually start with Richard and then go to Terry.
So there are the challenges as we see them are really, the biggest one is something you would almost not even think is an issue, and it's paratransit. And it's not what you have on the base side. Under federal law, if you go zero fare on your fixed route, you're required to go zero fare on your paratransit as well. And that may not sound like a big issue. You know, people with disabilities tend to have even lower incomes and tend to have even more significant revenue challenges, income challenges than fixed route riders. The challenge with this is that every marginal ride you provide on paratransit has a really high cost. In our situation, it's about $40 every time we carry a paratransit rider. Every marginal ride you provide on fixed route has almost zero cost because you probably have capacity to do it. So adding additional riders doesn't cost much. In our system, what we had done for the last 20 years, we've made every paratransit rider have a free fare on fixed route. So when they could use fixed route, they wrote free on fixed route. And that actually worked to move about 2/3 of our paratransit trips to fixed route over the last 20 years. And they were taking, we actually reduced our paratransit ridership voluntarily by 2/3 over that period. And that actually gave us money to expand fixed route over the period. So making it free has the potential of increasing demand on your paratransit system. And that in fact can happen in places. The way to avoid that, and we're hoping this will be the case in our circumstance, is by making really good fixed route. Because you have to make it accommodating, you have to make it accessible, you have to make it really comfortable for your riders so that the people using paratransit see fixed route as at least an equal option, if not better than what they get on the paratransit side. Our system has sort of that culture to it. I mean, to the question about calling our riders customers, we don't. Our riders are called guests, and we have that guest service philosophy really in it. And I think we can do that, but that is definitely a concern. The models say that the potential cost of zero fare on paratransit could be as much as $3 million a year to us, and that we can't afford if that ridership increases on the paratransit side. So that's one of the tests we're checking. The other issue is, how do you manage the challenge of people with mental illnesses that ride the bus inappropriately? And fare is used by lots of systems as a way to manage that. And I'm not saying it's a good way of doing it. I'm not saying it's the right way of doing it, but it is a tool that transit systems do use to try to control that issue. We didn't have much of an issue with it during COVID when we were fare free across the board. We hadn't had much of an issue with it in our fare free routes. Our operators are very concerned about it. So we said we would watch it, and we're paying a lot of attention to this issue. We've reached out to a lot of our social service agencies in the community to provide some resources outside of law enforcement so that we can try to stay on top of this so it doesn't become a problem. But that is a major concern among the operator groups, because they want it to be a safe and comfortable environment as well. And it's not going to work for our riders if it isn't a safe and comfortable environment. So we need to recognize that if it's too open, the environment can be uncomfortable for everybody. And so while we don't want money to be an impediment for people using the system, we also need to have it be, the environment be safe enough that it's not an impediment for feeling unsafe as well. And that is also an issue. And like I said, fare is a rough way of getting there, but that's what a lot of systems need to do.
Thanks, Richard. And I appreciate the focus on getting people the services they need rather than relying on enforcement. We'll go to Terry now.
Thanks. I would actually add to what Richard has said here. There is some concern with what we call non-destinational riding. And we experienced a significant rise in that during the COVID period of time when we did suspend fares for the safety of our operators and the riders. And that has been and continues to be a concern for our frontline workers, our operators specifically. I will add this: fare revenue is a key pillar of Metro's financial structure. So prior to COVID in 2019, we collected $167 million in fare box revenue. The cost for collecting that was about $17 million. Our fare structure requires the fare box, if you will, to bring in a minimum 25%. We shoot for about 30%. Roughly half of the fares that are paid are not paid by individuals. They are paid by employers. In a fare-free scenario, fare revenue would need to be replaced, or we would see some significant service cuts that we would have to take place if we gave up that $167 million. So there's a dilemma that goes back to the whole zero fare versus free. The system someone has to support it, fund it to make it work. So again, while we're focused on making sure that everyone has a ride, the way our system is currently set up, it is for those that have the ability to pay, we want them to pay to give our others who are in situations where they are not able to pay the ability to still get that ride to then have their opportunities to thrive.
Thanks, Terry. Kate?
Okay, sometimes I'm like, are you saying Katie or Kate? Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, these are all really good conversations. And just one thing I'll say is we have specifically, okay, so specifically about the fare box recovery, I believe our fare box recovery is in our bylaws voted on by the board members. Where I find this a little bit problematic here in Spokane are the statewide, because we all have the same statutes statewide, but our board is made up of elected officials, and I can tell you that 99% of them don't take public transit. We did an exercise where we were supposed to take the bus for a week, and everybody kind of went around the table. I didn't really do it. Or last year I took this one, bus doing this thing, and I just think that's a huge oversight. And I think we really need to amend that at the state level, because when you don't have people who ride transit, they don't really understand the nuances of putting money into the fare box and how it does. Somebody provided in the chat that it does, it slows things down because people have to wait to put the money in. And sometimes the bus drivers wait until people sit down, at least here in Spokane. And so not having that is really quick for, other transportation around the bus to be able to not have to stop for as long. And then the people who do get frustrated with bus services don't have to be as frustrated, and then the people can get on really quickly. But I also wanted to mention what someone was talking about, people experiencing homelessness in the chat. And I just, I love talking about these issues and topics, but I always like to urge people not to think about the barriers that are going to come to something that's going to be what should be a human right. So the positive is going to far outweigh the negative, and we can solve the negative problems that come because we do something good. And so I'm a big proponent. We have an outreach team here in Spokane that goes out to, it's called a street team, and they go out and they visit people who are experiencing homelessness on the street. Why can't we have that on the bus services? And we can, and it does work. And they have like 70% success rate of getting people in homes or into services they need. And so I just try to urge people to not think too much about what we're going to do about, people abusing the system, because those people who are abusing the system are far less than the people who are getting something out of it and actually being able to get to work and their appointments. So just definitely would like to, say that. Joel asked about replacing revenue. Well, the thing with Spokane is, unlike Terry in his organization, I think you said $160 million for fare box. We don't raise that much money, and I would say about to make ends meet, we'd need about $9 million to go zero fare for everybody in our system. And so I've proposed many ideas. We could partner with business communities and have them do free routes to their corridor and get them to implement the money so that they can traffic pedestrians and bikers and walkers and bus riders to their area and things like that. So that's one idea, but there's definitely a lot of ideas out there under the sun. I did want to talk just a little bit. Richard brought up paratransit, and that's been a huge topic whenever I bring up zero fare in Spokane. And one of the things they did in Kansas City is they made the fixed routes free for people with disabilities. And what they did in that system is they tried to pull people from paratransit over to fixed routes. And a lot of people didn't want to ride the fixed routes because they didn't really get quite a discount, and it wasn't really worth it because they got to point A to point B with paratransit. But it's a service here in Spokane that is 100% needed, would never take it away, but it's not very efficient. And so when people learn how to ride a fixed route, you can actually really get to where you're going in a more efficient manner. And so what they saw in Kansas City is they saw people from the disability community actually taking the fixed routes. And so paratransit just cost way less because they had less routes for paratransit. And that's a huge part of our budget at STA. And so that's one of the things I've kind of proposed here in Spokane. So just some other kind of things there, but I'll move on because we're running out of time.
Thanks, Councilmember. I've definitely heard that sentiment echoed by our disability rights partners that a lot of their constituents would prefer to take fixed route. And so making that easier for everyone is a big win. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll echo, some of what's been said and maybe add a little bit. I think that the big challenge is money, money, money. And part of that is we can't be sacrificing service quality. And in fact, if you're going to go fare free, you're going to need to be prepared to add service because more people are going to be riding. And as Terry mentioned, even though fare revenue does not make up the majority of money for Metro's operations or for any of the transit agencies in the Seattle area, it's a really big chunk. And it's really the smaller and more rural the agency, the tinier the portion of revenue is coming from fares. Whereas you get into a more dense urban environment, fares make up a significant chunk of money that you have to replace and more. But I think that, to me, the most realistic and fair way to pay for it is to have business pay. And I saw a few people in the chat were kind of bringing this up, the fact that really about half of fare revenue already is being paid for by employers through various kinds of employer pass or subsidy programs. And if you spread that out to all employers and had some kind of progressive payroll-based or employee-based tax that businesses were paying, it would be pretty cost-effective to fund all of the revenue that's currently coming from fares across the board. Now, to do that, I think that probably to do that countywide or Sound Transit wide, you would need some new authority from the state legislature. So there are some political challenges there. Seattle has already demonstrated that we can do a big business tax. So if Seattle wanted to try to go it alone on a fare free transit and use that funding mechanism, that would at least be technically possible. I think there's just a really good argument, not just that employers are already paying for a lot of it, but just that businesses need public transit and they need a great public transit system, not only to get their workers to work, but take Amazon, right? The sponsor of our event. Amazon not only needs to get their own employees to work, but they need the roads free for their massive fleets of delivery trucks to bring you your groceries and your toilet paper. And so it makes a lot of sense to ask large employers to be stepping up and funding the public transit system. So that's one option. I know that congestion pricing has been something that started to be discussed a little bit in Seattle. There are some challenges with how to do that equitably, but that could be another potential funding source for free public transit. I would say one other challenge that I'll point out that we run into here is just the fact that we have all of these overlapping agencies, right? So we have Metro, which is countywide, and then we have Sound Transit, which is a multi-county agency, and then we have, community transit also coming into Seattle, and we have, Seattle running the streetcars. And so figuring out how to do free transit, getting everyone on board, really would be best to do it regionally or statewide. It'd be awesome if the initiative for this could come from the state level, maybe from a governor or something. That would probably be the most effective way to get there, because I think this was mentioned in the chat too, some of the biggest benefits from free transit in principle is if you're not even having to tap a card, everyone can just get on, get off. You're saving a lot then on the time that it takes for people to board the bus. And really you would need to do it at a multi-agency scale in order to really fully realize those benefits, and also just not having all the capital costs of the Orca system, which are major. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop there, but options, yeah, money.
Hester, if I could, I would just add to the point Katie made here. When we talk about how we do this, I think a coordinated effort has to be in play. You mentioned the way we're building out our Metro Connects vision is how it connects to rail, which connects to BRT, which connects to some first and last mile and all. It's a coordinated dance. So if one piece of the system becomes free, you start to create the potential for a two-tiered, three-tiered system, which we do not support that. And ultimately more confusion if you're on a part of the system that's free, but then you end up transferring to another link, pun intended, by the way, and then you need to pay, and then there's no pay somewhere else in the system. I know the ride-free system was confusing for folks just in Seattle, where do you pay when you get on? Do you pay when you get off? And you talk about disincentivizing folks to use the system. As Richard said, the first thing you think about is how easy is it to even do this? And that can become a deterrent. So I think how we all coalesce together to do a thing is extremely important, especially in the Puget Sound region, where you're using multiple modes to get from one place to another.
That's a really great point, Terry. And I think that takes us well into our next question, which I'll kind of do like a lightning round since we're getting a little low on time. But, you know, this is clearly a really nuanced conversation with a lot of considerations, many of which you've already named, kind of the regionalism aspect, the interplay with paratransit. And these are both universal and unique to specific regions. What else do you think is often overlooked in conversations on free transit? What opportunities or challenges do you think merit more attention in this discussion, possibly for a future transit talk? I'll start with Kate. Councilmember Kate Burke.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think there's a myriad of options that we could really talk about, but I think here specifically in Spokane, and this goes a little bit back to the last question too, with the regional issues that we have, is trying to, I think someone said it in the chat too, is educate you know, car drivers and community members about the pros of buses, even if they might not take it or feel comfortable taking it, by having better bus services that are accommodating to every type of income is something that is a plus for the entire city. I think also in Spokane, I think we're a little bit far behind the curve when it comes to some of the progressive initiatives and policies that we're all talking about here, which is why I haven't gotten very far in some of this. But for me, you know, I think educating our business community on why transit is important to their business. We're still kind of stuck in that spot. And I know Seattle kind of went through a battle, you know, maybe 7 years ago around this exact topic. You probably are still talking about it now, but that's when it kind of really came up. And so for me, it's just really basic things like why we need transit and how it makes a community vibrant in so many different ways. It doesn't just help, you know, the people that Katie's working with. It also helps the businesses and the community and the traffic flow and all of that kind of stuff. So that's just, you know, that's kind of where I think we are here in Spokane, is we have to really just do that educational piece to the community. So.
Thanks, Councilmember. All right, lightning round. Katie, then Terry, then Richard.
I guess I would just drill down a little bit more into the funding question and say that, like, and this is really not only to do with fare free transit, but just funding our transit system, right, and our service. And one of the things that frustrates, you know, us and our members is just how the options that, for example, King County has to fund transit are very regressive, right? It's always sales tax, you know, flat car tab fees. And I think that a step forward would be really just getting all of our local elected officials, agencies, you know, transit advocates, organizations on board with making a big push at the state level to get better and more progressive funding options for transit locally, as well as just direct state funding for transit operations and for subsidizing fares.
Thanks, Katie. Terry, then Richard.
I would say something to keep in mind would be the quality of service needs to continue to improve. As Katie mentioned, we're going to need more of it. It needs to be more, it needs to be better. I think customers across all income groups continue to tell us that having a network that is fast, reliable, and safe and gets them to where they need to go is equally as important as fare discounts. And in one focus group in particular, participants from Mother Africa said that they were designing while we're designing the annual subsidized pass program, it's good that there's some discounts, but if you don't have service near the rider, what good does that do?
Yeah, you're here. The other thing I think that we need to do is we need to educate people on the disparate impact of fares on very low income individuals. That, you know, we have these great subsidy programs in our passes for people that ride frequently, But the reality is that the lowest income populations pay the highest average fares because they usually don't have the wherewithal to put the money together to buy a monthly pass or a weekly pass. They pay cash fares almost every day. And that's almost true in every system in the country, even where we've tried to do these discounts for low income populations. If you look at it, you find that we always were charging the highest prices to the lowest income population. Even that's not our intention. And it's just the way the system has worked out. So that's a real challenge. The other piece, I think there's a real opportunity right now with the COVID shutdowns. I think all of us have realized how many critical workers in our society depend on public transportation. I know it was a real shock in our community how much of our ridership remained when the COVID situations hit, and how those people were the people who were working in the kitchens at the hospital, were mopping the floors, were doing the service work that makes the economy continue to run. And that made a big difference in the community. It took all the sting out of the free fare argument because people could see, oh, wait a second, these aren't people just going to the liquor store and going, hanging out on the bus and not doing anything else. These are people that are necessary for my business and necessary for my life to continue. And I don't think that was really understood, that these were people going to and from jobs to critical jobs, going right on. So that, to me, that's an opportunity we need to take advantage of and say, look, when we all had to shut down, those people who had to continue working, they were on the bus, and that's what they were out there going to do. And we can tell you what the percentage was, and it was significant.
Thank you, Richard. So we're coming up on our last pre-prepared question, and I'm also going to kind of meld it with some stuff that we've been seeing in the chat. So we're kind of stepping back and revisiting those challenges with a growth mindset, a vision mindset. How can we mitigate some of the issues we've raised? What options do agencies, localities, and advocates have to work towards a fare-free system without sacrificing stable revenue streams? How can we think creatively about some of the challenges you mentioned, like fare box recovery, cost of collection, scarcity, the kind of scarcity mindset of service versus affordability? What will this conversation look like in 15 years? Asking you to kind of dream a little bit. We'll start with Terry this time.
Thanks. I think first off, we start with our here and now, and we believe that our targeted income-based model is accomplishing the goal of providing mobility to everyone without sacrificing the revenue that the system relies upon to deliver and expand the services that are needed. I've heard quite a few thoughts that we have. We do want to get out of the regressive taxing system we're in. We want to get out of the volatile system that we're in, sales tax wise, that some days we're high and some days we're low. We're looking for something that does do that regional funding that provides that fast, frequent, reliable, all-day service. I'm excited about what that could potentially be. And hopefully the collective that comes forward to help us get to a regional funding mechanism that puts that in the rearview mirror and then helps us to then truly just focus on what I was saying before, which is the quality of the service. If it's frequent, fast, and reliable, and you build it, I believe, for the way we approach those with greater need, you're automatically creating a system that others will then show up and ride on as well. So 15 years from now, if we can figure out how to do that collectively, then I believe that we'll see ridership increase. And that means that others will then follow suit and ask you for your white paper, if you will, and begin to figure out how to increase their ridership as well.
Thank you, Terry. Let's go to Councilmember Burke.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo a little bit what Terry said. I think, and someone in the chat had said that if, transit is free, it doesn't really help if the services aren't really, there. So, I've simultaneously been working on trying to encourage our transit system to not do routes that are from point A to point B, but more like a grid-like system. And we actually have been experimenting a little bit with that. So the one thing I'll just say is I think trying new things is really important and key. One thing that, I've seen being on the board of STA is we can't really predict ridership. You never know what's going to happen to the economy. If the economy's up, people get cars. So then ridership goes down, and we just never really know. And so by trying new things is the only way we're going to be able to figure out if these solutions are going to work in our communities. And so I'm a big proponent of throwing out ideas and getting looked at like I'm crazy, but I'm going to keep doing it because it's the only way that we can do anything is by, trying to get these things. I also really liked what Katie said about, maybe we could work at trying to get some state policies changed, because I always feel bad for people that don't get to pass these policies and they're left out of some of these services. So I'm a big proponent of going big like that and trying to service all of the areas of our beautiful state. So I'll keep it short though. I just think new ideas and trying different things is really, really key to the success of getting where we need to go. So.
Thank you. Let's go to Richard.
Yeah, I double down on the idea that we got to continue to improve service. Frequency and convenience are what's really going to drive the system. I'm really optimistic that technology is going to solve a lot of these issues. I mean, there are good technological solutions if the technology costs can come down and they're available to a broader group of our population. If it costs you $1,200 for a smartphone to do it, that's not going to serve our low-income populations. But those solutions are coming. I mean, you can see them out there, and maybe fare is not going to be the impediment that it has been at some point. That being said, there are places that free fares or taxation can solve some of these issues. And I think the bigger part of this is we need to keep selling the value that transit brings to our communities, that we're a critical part of the infrastructure. We play a critical role for lots and lots of people, and our communities do not operate if we don't exist. Even in smaller communities, we have to be there. And in our big cities, it's absolutely necessary for us to be there and being a functional part of it. And that means for everybody. And so we need to find a system that works for all of us. And fares are an impediment for many people to run the system. So we got to figure that out.
All right, a big vision question. Katie, I'm going to have you kind of take us out.
Okay, I'll just mention a couple of things then. So one way forward, when COVID began, it feels like a long time ago now, the Transit Riders Union was just about to kick off, or had just kicked off, a campaign that we called Orca for All. And one of the goals of that campaign was to try to get a Seattle policy passed that would require employers above a certain size to subsidize transit for their workers. And this was coming out of a recognition that, we did a lot of surveying and talking to workers, and high wage workers, tech workers are almost always getting a fully subsidized employer paid transit pass already. Lower wage workers are almost never getting an employer subsidized transit pass. And so we thought that a good step toward getting transit passes in the hands of more people would be to pass this policy. And then, COVID happened and transit became free temporarily, and the attention was elsewhere. So but I still think that that's a good policy, and that's one way to get more employers used to paying for transit fares, and could maybe ease the transition to the idea of maybe we should just do a employer business tax to pay for transit fares. I think another quite different idea that I'll point out is just that improving the quality of service, hand in hand with that goes affordable housing density, housing density zoning, and that's a discussion that's happening in a lot of cities now, I know, but making sure that people can afford to live near where they work, and that we are making space for all the people who want and need to be able to live in a city like Seattle, that will increase the demand for transit, that will increase ridership, that will increase the appetite for the demand for good service, and also potentially for free transit. I would hope that 15 years from now, we have a free transit system. Let's do it statewide, or at least we've got a plan and we're on the way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to extend a huge thank you and a virtual round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here You're all leaders in your sectors and in Washington, and we're so grateful for you. As we wrap up and thank our panelists, feel free to leave us any resources, comments, feedback, or future transit talk ideas in the chat. We will be combing the chat for those good ideas. We'll also be combing the chat for any questions that we might not have gotten a chance to work on. I think we'll be able to do some follow-up on this topic, given that it's not going away anytime soon. We will also be sending out a recording later. Please feel free to share with your friends. And our biggest reminder of all is that exactly 1 month from now, we will be hosting our Tuxes and Trains Gala, and we hope to see you all there. Please check it out, buy tickets. We can be joining us at the Burke Museum on October 1st at 7:30 p.m. to celebrate transit and mingle with fellow transit enthusiasts. Full vaccination for COVID-19 will be required for this event and will be held in compliance with the state's mask mandate. So for more information and to purchase your tickets, see the link in the chat. We would love if you would stay connected with TCC via social media and the platforms that I believe will be shown on the slides right here. Please reach out, say hello. We're so grateful for you all for being here. Thanks for coming.